What you need to know about the legal side of using AI in podcasting. Hold on tight as we explore the legal aspects of using generative AI in podcasting. That's what's in store on this episode of Legit Podcast Pro. Welcome to Legit Podcast Pro, the podcast where we take a deep dive into the legal aspects of podcasting. I'm your host, Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer. In today's episode, we are going to explore the legal issues that can arise when you use generative AI tools in podcasting. So grab your headphones and let's embark on this legal adventure. Well, first off, I need to fix one thing. Generative AI, such as the popular GPT models, has revolutionized content creation. But with this great power comes legal responsibility, and it's important to be aware of the legal implications that come with this kind of technology. So let's just dive into the key legal issues that you need to consider to stay on the right side of the law. First on our list is intellectual property. Generative AI models have been trained on vast amounts of data, which absolutely includes tons of copyrighted material. If these AI generated tools are creating content that you are using in your show, and it turns out to be substantially similar to something else, then you could find yourself in the crosshairs of an accusation that it infringes on someone's copyright. And that obviously can lead to all kinds of legal complications. So, key number one, always ensure that the content you create doesn't violate any intellectual property rights. The other thing on this with copyright law is that the Copyright Office has said that in order to be eligible for copyright protection, the content, that's the stuff you're creating using these tools, must be human authored. AI stuff can't be protected. So you will have trouble claiming ownership if your work ever gets infringed. Now, another angle on intellectual property is, of course, trademark law. AI tools can also generate content that could cause brand confusion. For example, suppose you use a title generator and the title you use happens to include or somehow be some other company's brand or trademark. Well, that's likely to cause confusion in the marketplace. And, as to whether the show or episode is affiliated with or sponsored by or endorses or is endorsed by that brand. And that could amount to trademark infringement or a variation called unfair competition. So be sure if you're using AI that you actually apply some human critical reasoning and check to make sure you're not stepping on brands' trademark toes. Because remember, creativity is great, but respecting the work of others is even more important. So protect your podcast by respecting intellectual property rights and avoiding copyright and trademark infringement scenarios. Privacy and data protection is another crucial consideration. Podcasts often involve sharing of personal information like guest interviews or discussions about people. And it's really essential to handle this data responsibly and in compliance with all the privacy laws. You got to get proper consent, you got to anonymize personal information where appropriate, and you need to securely store and transmit data so you protect it. Protect yourself and your listeners. So let's keep the secrets in the podcasting universe safe. Safeguard the podcast and your listeners' privacy by following the best practices. Now, maybe you're thinking, well, how could this be a problem? Well, here's an example. Suppose you use an AI tool to transcribe or edit your interviews. That transcript might include material that should have been left out, or it could even include paraphrasing. So you've got a bit of a problem there. Or you might use an AI tool to do the research and writing for your show. And if that AI finds some material out there that really should have been kept private, even though it's now out in the public, but it puts it into your script, you could be responsible for spreading that information much more publicly. Yeah, it was already out there somewhere, but maybe it was kind of buried in a big database something. The additional exposure you give it could be embarrassing or painful for that person, and that can, of course, lead to all kinds of trouble. So be careful. Computers don't believe in privacy. All data is equal to them. So again, you gotta apply some human brain cells to make sure. Now, defamation, more specifically libel, is a legal minefield that has to be navigated carefully. It is not uncommon for generative tools to fabricate things. In fact, the computer scientists have taken to calling this hallucination. So, that being the case, AI generated content might inadvertently contain false or defamatory statements about individuals or organizations. To avoid potential legal claims, then, it is crucial that you review and verify the generated content before you publish it. And there have been a couple of cases where this has already been a problem. In one that you might have heard about, a lawyer used ChatGPT to write a brief that he then filed with the court. The trouble is, it included some citations to cases and statutes that, well, just plain didn't exist. And when he went so far as to ask, hey, confirm those citations, it lied to him again. So that computer is in some real hot water with the judge in the case. And if it can happen there, well, what could happen in your podcast where maybe you're not being quite so careful? So I guess that's the message. Be careful. Another situation that might be a little closer to home for us content creators is a journalist used ChatGPT to do some preliminary research about a company he was writing a story about. And the AI generated some really exciting, interesting, but totally false information. It actually stated that this person who had zero connection to the company, had been a part of the company, had been implicated in some criminal activities, charged with crimes, sued in civil court, all that kind of stuff. Totally false. So he's now suing the makers of ChatGPT, OpenAI, and and we'll find out what happens. But this journalist was smart. He listened to his instincts, checked those facts, and found out that it was false before publishing it. And I think that's how this man that the machine was talking about actually found out what had happened. But if this journalist had published that story the machine gave him, big libel lawsuit, potentially millions of dollars. Accuracy is our shield against these fiery arrows of defamation cases. So avoid legal trouble by ensuring the accuracy, fact-checking all of your AI-generated content, and steering clear of defamatory statements. Now, the right of publicity is another important aspect we have to consider. You know, I preach the guest release gospel. When featuring guests or individuals in your podcast, make sure that you have obtained appropriate permissions or releases to use their names, voices, or likenesses in that generated content. Respecting the rights of individuals is key to avoiding legal disputes. I offer a free podcast release. You can get it at podcastrelease.com, and that is a great start to make sure you have permission to use an interview or interview subjects content. But if you're talking about other people, especially celebrities, but anybody, you might want to visit podcastlawforms.com and get the other kind of the other kind of release, excuse me. So respecting the rights of these individuals is really the key to avoiding all kinds of legal disputes. But these AI tools have gotten good enough. They can actually convincingly mimic voices of pretty much anybody you want. So if you're using an AI to actually create the audio recordings that you're publishing, it is not inconceivable that it could be using distinctive parts or all of some real person's voice. And in states where the right of publicity is recognized, you could find yourself defending a lawsuit over that misappropriation of the sound of the person's voice. And whatever you do, do not ask an AI to read your script in the voice of a famous person. Those folks are used to getting paid for voiceover work. They and their representatives will be all over you in a heartbeat. And just another side note, on the video side, these AI tools are getting really good, generating video as well. And it won't be long, I think, before we start to see convincing video of stars and influencers, politicians, and other famous people saying things that they never said, doing things that never happened. So respect people's rights, obtain proper permissions and releases, and that will help you assure that you have a smooth, legally compliant podcasting experience. Now, misleading or deceptive content is a big no-no. As podcasters, we strive to provide accurate, reliable information to our listeners. Using these generative AI tools like ChatGPT could very easily result in creating misleading or deceptive content. And that's true of the graphical stuff, the visual stuff as well. Even if it's not a defamatory statement, The output from an AI could lead you to be accused of violating FTC regulations, of engaging in false endorsements, and much more. So always verify the facts and ensure that your AI generated content is truthful, not misleading, not deceptive. Honesty is your best policy, even in the AI realm. Bottom line, uphold the integrity of your podcast by double checking the accuracy of the AI content and delivering reliable information to your audience. Now, attribution and plagiarism are really ethical but also legal obligations. If your AI generated content incorporates material from other sources, and let's face it, it all does, proper attribution is a must to avoid plagiarism, especially when there's big chunks of stuff coming from those other sources. Even where the stuff doesn't actually rise to the level of like copyright infringement, respecting the origin of the material you're using and giving credit where it's due is important to maintain the integrity in your podcasting endeavor. The trouble is these AI tools, they don't tell you their sources. So you might not know until a source comes at you with a legal claim. In fact, in some of the intellectual property industries, the database industries in particular, address systems and those kinds of things, it's actually pretty common for the owners of material to plant fake information in with that valid data. So the owners can easily spot when that fake data shows up out in the world in places where it hasn't been licensed, it isn't supposed to. The AI could easily incorporate that kind of thing and effectively paint a target on your back. So let's be original and honor the creative minds that come before us. Foster a culture of integrity by giving attribution and acknowledging the work of others in your content. And if you're using AI, give that attribution too. It's just the right thing to do so your audience knows where things are coming from. In fact, now's a really good time for me to disclose that the initial outline for this episode and some of the sentences you're hearing me say were generated by AI. I then went in and fleshed it out, and I actually caught a few mistakes and things that I needed to remove, but that's the approach. And I think this disclosure is perfectly reasonable. The other thing about that is I think that it gives us an opportunity, those who are creating human-generated content, to say so also, because as we see more and more AI-generated stuff, we naturally will want to know, hey, this is 100% human generated. It's more organic. It's like an organic foods label. So the next thing is it's critical that you familiarize yourself with the terms of service and usage policies of the generative AI platforms or tools that you're using. These documents will outline the permitted use of the content generated by the machines and any legal obligations that might be associated with it. Some of them have restrictions on what you're allowed to use the output for, restrictions on how you monetize, where you distribute the content, that kind of thing. So stay informed, comply with these terms, and protect yourself and your podcast. Remember, reading the fine print could save you from a real legal sprint. That one came from the AI. So that's going to wrap it up for our discussion on the legal issues that can arise when using generative AI in podcasting. Remember, this list isn't exhaustive, and you should not consider what you're hearing from me today or rely upon this as legal advice. As always, it's a good idea to consult with legal professionals who specialize in intellectual property and privacy and media law to ensure that you are complying with all of the applicable requirements. When in doubt, seek a lawyer out. Thanks for tuning in to Legit Podcast Pro. I'm Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer, reminding you to podcast smart and podcast legally. And I'll see you again next time. Thanks for being with me. So if you're watching live, hello. Nice to see you. Hope you're enjoying what we're doing here. And if you have something to say, I'd love to hear from you. Say something in the comments before I give up and go home. All right. I think I'm just going to do that. I'll sign off. This was a little bit of a longer episode than many. And I'll see you next week with a new episode of Legit Podcast Pro. Thanks for watching.